Hi there, we're live. Hello and welcome to our third Summer Show Symposium. I'm Stephen Green, and today we're focusing on innovation, design, engineering. This is a very quick introduction from Sophia Teresi next to me and myself as joint current heads of the IDE program. We're immensely proud of our students, particularly this year, completing their work against the backdrop of the global pandemic. We'd encourage everyone to check out the IDE projects here on the Design Engineering Summer Show platform and also on the RCA 2020 platform when that launches from Thursday the 16th of July onwards. The IDE program celebrates its 40th birthday later this year. The world is at a pivotal point where the concerns and values of the program are more important than at any time in its history. We can consider this event today as a very soft launch of the whole series of 40th anniversary events and activities, where the IDE family will come together to discuss the challenges facing us and future generations. I'll hand over now to Sophia to remind everyone of the collaboration between the RCA and Imperial, which is at the heart of what we do.
Thank you, Stephen. The collaboration between the two institutions allows us to pursue the immense potential at the intersection of design creativity with the rigor of science and technology. At our two virtual shows, the RCA and Imperial shows, we are presenting projects for the future, actually a constellation of individually responsible, relevant, multiple, and diverse futures, embodying alignment approaches to melding deep disciplinary expertise with creativity and empathy for people and the planet. Today, we are looking forward to a lively debate at this intersection, and I pass on back to Stephen to carry on with, I guess, the video and the symposium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophia. Now we're going to have a very short video, and then the event will be hosted by Nick Munro, who's an IDE alumni and visiting professor at the Dyson School. And let's see how he gets on with living up to the title of Sparks Will Fly. Thank you. Over to the video.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen and Sophia, the heads of program for the IDE course, both at Imperial and at the RCA. We've done a splendid job this year. This is the first symposium, as Stephen mentioned, and I'm delighted to be joined by a stellar panel of industry leaders, movers, shakers, achievers, etc. And what I'm going to do is to introduce our panel, and then we're going to review project by project, and then we're going to see if sparks do indeed fly, and if this particular symposium provides a spark for future ones. So, with me and virtually alongside me are Sophia Qureshi. Wave your hand, Sophia.
Hello.
Sophia's an award-winning architect, innovator, designer, educator, graduate of the RCA. She's the founder of Cup Club, the returnable drinks packaging system, which won the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and IDEO Award last year. And she's a very welcome panelist.
It's amazing to be here.
Excellent. We then have Ella Duran, a highly acclaimed designer, artist, photographer, and maker across product, textiles, fashion, and furniture, who's also now a lecturer at the RCA. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts and champion of the circular economy. Give us a wave, Ella.
Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to be here.
Francis Bromley is joining us too. Francis is a first-class graduate from Brunel University and co-founder of the international award-winning Scabetti lighting company, delivering art installations around the world from their workshops in Stoke-on-Trent. There you are, Francis. Give us a wave. Excellent. And then we have Sebastian Byrne, the renowned British designer, creative director, curator, and educator with 30 years of success in his eponymous London studio. Sebastian's program leader for the Masters of Design Innovation program at IED Madrid, and we're delighted to have him too.
Great to be here.
And then last but very much not least, we have Professor Peter Childs. He is the professor at large, quote unquote, the wild card here, with accolades just too numerous to mention. But I must mention at least one. He's the founder of the Dyson School of Design Engineering, and therefore he truly is the one to blame for all of this. So that's our panel.
Here. Looking forward to engaging.
Excellent. So we only have 60 minutes, and we're going to try and get through as much as we possibly can in that time. We're going to show a video in a moment, and then we're going to have some questions from myself to the panel, and the audience is welcome to throw in questions, which I will then direct to them. So here we go. First video, and let's just see how those sparks do fly. So just waiting for that video to spin up, which is Bay. Here we go.
Hey little one, we're thinking about you.
Good night.
Sweet dreams.
So a charming start and a great project, we think. And just to echo what Stephen said, this is a group of students who've produced that video to demonstrate their project, whereas normally they would have a degree show and all of the physical attributes to present the project to the audience. They don't have that, so they've had to produce a video, and that's the result. So I have a question, and I'm going to pose that to Sophia, first of all. So Sophia, does that solve, do you think, a real problem? Is it worth the candle? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think it's a very emotional project. And interestingly, I had, my nephew was born premature about 6-7 months ago. So I saw my brother and his wife go through something pretty alarmingly emotional. So I think the way that they've approached it is, in terms of creating that sensory interaction, is definitely how I would have also looked at developing something that binds the maternal and paternal relationship with a premature baby at that stage where you're not able to be with them for large or extended parts of time. So the first thing I would have, my reaction was that perhaps there could be a little bit of consideration with regards to what the infant or the baby might experience internally besides the audio. I wasn't able to fully capture whether there was something that was reminding their parents of scent, which is a really big feature for premature babies, is the scent of the mother and the father. And maybe that's not come across in the video, so you'll have to let me know whether I'm absolutely wrong and there's something in there. But I think that it is a very emotional, all-round sensory experience. So wonderful project, very, very thoughtful. And I'd love to kind of see it develop a little further. And I'm sure they're your students, so you'll probably be able to fill us in on some of those details. But that's my just immediate sort of thoughts.
Well, thanks for that. And I think that I'm now going to move to Seb, because I think the question does occur in terms of, well, is it deliverable? Can it be developed? Because these students are clever enough to, let's say, convince us that things will work without necessarily having the background in place to ensure that they do work. So, Seb, what would your opinion be? Is that a deliverable, doable project, or a flight of fancy?
I think it probably is doable in some form or another. I think what Sophia was saying about making it a little bit more multi-sensorial is very important. I think on a practical level, we have to there's a leap of faith involved with a lot of these projects, in that we assume that they've covered some basic kind of feasibility in terms of technology, and it's not purely totally conceptual. I think, having looked at the different videos, some are a bit more immediately feasible than others, as always. But I think it's not a million miles. I think for me, this project, the question that I had on it was more about the physical materialization of the objects that they had, or this person has created, to represent the link between the parents and the child. And it looks, to me, kind of silicon, quite alien-like. I didn't feel I was attracted to that object as a transferring mechanism to the baby. But maybe that's personal, but that's the aesthetic of the actual object that is the point of contact, which I think was my concern. But otherwise, also a brilliant project area, and I can totally, have it being a parent, and I think we're all parents, we can totally imagine what a nightmare that situation would be and how important this is to solve. Yeah.
Well, Francis, you have a couple of kids, and not so small these days, but one of the questions I think that then comes out is, well, we all know the pain and difficulty of developing products. We've all been through that process many times. So is it worth it? Do you think that you've got something here that's really worth the commitment that it would take to get from where it is into where, as Seb's describing it might get to?
Well, something that struck me was I was intrigued to know who would be buying this product. Is it the parent? And if so, I imagine it's quite a significant investment at a time where they've just had a new baby, they're stressed, maybe finances have been juggled to get to that point, and then they have to invest in a piece of technology which they will be sold and which they will be told this will make the experience so much less harmful. And therefore, are you targeting this at the health providers? And therefore, should your marketing be directed to them rather than the end user as much? So you've got to think about the target market as much. And if it is an expensive bit of kit, it has to work for many parents one after the other, and therefore you've got to think about it as extended life. So after you've used it in the intensive care scenario, can you bring that home to offer another quality that has an extended life? Maybe that makes it more viable as a product. I thought it was very interesting that you can put it down and say goodnight. I've never done that with a child and known that you can get a good night's sleep. So that's kind of interesting. Quite good, yeah.
Well, interesting comment, and I think, yeah, you might actually find that it's, you know, a sharing economy product rather than, you know, you buy and then own it or whatever. You know, pass it around, pass the parcel, I think could be the principle on that. But, you know, Ella, you know, I'm really interested in what could be deemed a $64,000 question, which is, well, these students are attempting to generate good design. That's what this is focused on delivering. So what would be your view on that? Do you think that we have something here that would qualify as good design or not?
That's a really good question. I'm a bit with Seb on the material, but having read Francis, I think I did read that their vision was to sell it through the hospital, the NHS. And so they also have a vision, having read a bit on the, that they look to see it being recycled for each new user. So again, I liked to see that within the circular economy, it could do that. But in term, I also felt it alien taking it off at night because of the fact that it could hug your arm. You would probably think, let's just keep that on so that all night you have that sense. I think that it does, I do think it's very compelling and does have a place. Yes, quite the designing of it, I think will need iterations and balance, and whether silicon is the right material, possibly. I also want to mention what Sophia said about the sensors. I'm absolutely with her on that I think the smell side as well, because it's such a sensory thing. How far have they thought about that within the incubator for the child? And that, yeah. I'd love that feedback, because it did seem very centered on the parents being left behind, and yet the child is hearing their voice, and that's it.
Yeah, actually, I happen to know that they have thought about the smell, and they have made provision for items to be left with the child that really capture that smell. But interestingly, that point wasn't brought out in the project. And I think in terms of a critique, that's a slight miss, and something that we might throw back to them as a ball that they would want to play and incorporate in their next iteration of the many, as you rightly say, that they're going to have to go through to get from where they're at now to something you know, worthwhile and deliverable. Well, listen, great comments. That's the opening ball. So we've now got another video, which is in the manner of IDE, a very, very different topic. So we're going to roll that video, and then we'll kick back and see what we think of this next particular project. So hang on tight. This is, well, this could be deemed a fast ride. We'll see. Next video. Well, there you go. That was the Tire Collective, our second video. You know, I think let's work on the principle that the last shall be first. So, Ella, I'm going to ping this one to you, really. So the first question, you know, is this not addressing the real problem, you know? Are we all looking in the wrong direction in terms of, you know, trading in the diesel and buying the electric vehicle and all that, when actually all along the biggest issue is what this particular group are focusing on, or are they on the wrong lines perhaps, you know, and the industry's already charging down the path and has got its teeth into changing fuels and whatever. What's your thought on this? Does this address a problem or no?
I think it does address a problem. I think both issues need to be addressed. I think the film's very compelling, but it leaves so many questions. For instance, it almost looks viable as the way they featured it at the end, and yet how would a customer, you know, separate the particles? What would they do with the particles in order for it to get to be a new tire into the future? So there's a whole system, a circular economy that needs to be built around that idea in itself, which I like. So from where I'm sitting, I'm fascinated in that being something to be developed, but it still feels like it's very much in developing stages.
Yeah, well, I think that's I may then ping that to Frances now, as someone who's done a lot of her own product development and is familiar with all of the processes in there. Is it deliverable, Frances? Can you see that being developed, and how might you go about doing that?
It's a tricky one. I think I'm a little bit with Ella in terms of it's a very compelling story, and I can see that it's something that needs to be addressed, but is more the question whether we should be using tires in the first place if they create this devastating impact, and should we remove the problem that's there. So in terms of developing the product, it's difficult because if you start to question those things, you question the motivation behind developing the product. So I like the concept of it being close to the vehicle. I like the fact of a Hoover vacuuming up all the chemical and product waste that goes with a product, so that the vehicle itself is a non-polluting entity. You know, so that concept I really like. But that's where, as I start to develop the project, I'd start to question the viability of it as an item.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So viability and all of that with something that's so commercial as this quite quickly comes into the equation, doesn't it? So Sophia, from your point of view, I mean, would you see that project as worth pursuing? Do you think that the students could get investment for that? What would be the route that, and obviously you've had a lot of experience with Cup Club, generating your own venture capital, doing that. You know, if you were to apply the same principles, could you see a win here, or do you think it's going to be a troubled road? No pun. Well, maybe it's a pun.
So good question. I have a huge bias for anything that's circular economy. I think first, and also I think the storytelling, the quality of the messaging is on point. It's clear what the data points are, and I love the comparison between the per day and then the longest bus route, and that gives you both the the context or the issue is that he's looking at, more kind of one-to-one mobility, where you might buy a car and you might think of certain decisions, but then also government is purchasing infrastructure or vehicles, buses, lorries, vans. So you can kind of understand the immense scale of operations that is utilizing essentially what is a really basic component of mobility, which are tires. And to try and change the material of all of that, as an entrepreneur coming into it, it's going to be a massive ask. So I would suspect that you would look at the sort of a short term and a long term, and even the short term is about 3 to 5 years, and the long term is 10, 15, 20 years plan. And you could probably look at, and you'd want to do this in tandem. So you'd start off with your short term is, well, how do we fix the current problem, which is around this collection of the debris that's coming out, and do that in a way where you're working with car manufacturers to perhaps work on a new mudguard design because they're an existing component of a car, and specifically hone into EV manufacturers. So, I mean, Tesla would be all over this. It'd be fantastic to see if there's uptake or interest there, but also other car manufacturers who are clearly making a big run in the EV space, and there are quite a few. And then the long-term strategy would be to work with policy to understand, is this the right material moving forward, considering what impact it's making? Because that's a very slow process. You're trying to make an incremental change in a very big system, which you don't have control over. And so if I was going into it, that's how I would approach it. That's how I would discuss this with investors. I would try and get one car brand that was interested in piloting and testing it on a small scale. And then start to also look at tire manufacturers and speak to one or two of them who are interested in moving towards a more sustainable or a different material, and then work on that as well. So these are sort of two-pronged approach that I think might work, but it would require an incredible amount of infrastructure to support long-term. So just something to bear in mind. This is not a quick entrepreneur journey.
Yeah, well, a lengthy road, I think that's true. But so if we then bring back to you then, Seb, so from a design point of view, and what do you think? Would you be strapping these to your Tesla in the near future, or would you see them as perhaps being integrated into, well, if not the Tesla, then you pick your own wheels. That's fine.
I could pop them on my Fiat 500, but
that'll be fine.
I think, I mean, as everyone said, it's definitely a really important area, and actually it's that level of communication that they've achieved, which is, I think, probably the strongest element of the project in a way, because it's initially about education and communication of this problem, and then they've chosen to execute that at the moment as a kind of add-on accessory, if you like, or that's what it appears as. But as said, if it was integrated into a car, that would give you a kind of more medium-term way of delivering it. But it's less nice as a project. I can see that. It's difficult for me to, from what I've seen of it, to understand whether or not they've got some sort of intellectual property on the actual method of extracting the tire dust.
So I'm going to get here, if I may, Seb. The video we saw was produced, I think, in January, actually. And of course, these are each dynamic teams, and they've built this, they've tested it. We've seen it working with carbon dust going in the right locations into the right hoppers. Right. And the potential for teams like this to incorporate their designs perhaps into the wheel eyebrow in some sophisticated design fashion, even especially in the Fiat 500 example, there potentially is significant market traction here, perhaps. And just to pick up upon Raj's question, tire dust is here to stay. We've got, 30 million, 40 million vehicles around the UK alone, many more around the world, churning out tire dust. So perhaps an innovation like this could be for sorting out the old problem as well as sorting out the problems going forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was, sorry, just to come back on that a second, obviously the technology is important to them and they've chosen to communicate their idea through this add-on product for now, but the real interest is actually applying it a little bit more on a mass level within the car, I would think, and then going forward trying to influence the tire industry, because presumably, as Sophia was saying, it's probably got a massive momentum and you're never going to, it's going to take forever to do that, but actually isn't there something that could be done with the actual material that's used in tires to reduce that even by a small percentage? That would be, but this is at this point it's drawing attention to the whole issue, and it does that really well, I think, and being visible as an add-on, it's more visible. So in a short term, I think it's not bad as a kind of here wave up. If you saw that on the front of a car, you'd say, "What's that?" And then you'd learn about it, and you'd kind of. So I think as a first step, it's really not a bad thing. And if the technology is there to match, that's good.
Yeah, well, I think I mean they're great comments, and I personally love the ambition of it. I think that Ella, don't you happen to have Elon Musk's phone number in your back pocket?
I'll just get it.
Pass that on, right? Yeah, exactly.
He's in Mars at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So between us, who knows? Maybe we can offer some assistance here. I do happen to know they've just won 10K in terms of a grant to push it forward. And I think the team members themselves, I mean, how good's that? The team members themselves not only have ambition for the project, but they are motivated themselves personally to pursue it. And there's an opportunity here perhaps to actually see conversion of a student idea in some form into reality. And that so often, as we've, I'm sure, all seen, is lacking. There's some great ideas that come out of degree shows and so on, but the conversion rate can be very, very low. And who knows, with 10 grand and Elon's phone number, then this one could come alive, could start to roll. Anyway, so moving on. Great comments, and we've now got another change of topic and another video to roll, which is from Saltico. Let's roll that video, and again we can have some good comment about that in a very different field, almost literally. Well, there we go. A whole new field, as I mentioned. Very, very interesting project. And then I think I'm going to pick you as the first victim here, Sophia. What do you think? Is this addressing a problem? Is it innovative? Is it original? What is your sense on that particular topic?
So you always pick me on the hard ones first, which is always nice. This one's a little difficult. One, there's clearly a problem around textile production and the impact that it creates, not just on water consumption, but dyes, contamination, etc. So the need is definitely there. I was a little bit confused with the communication here in the video. I didn't fully understand the crop part or the harvest part. So I might need a little bit of assistance in just understanding fully what that has to do with the water consumption part. But I recognize that if there's a way for us to essentially engineer and manufacture textiles in a way which is using less fresh water, certainly that would for us solve a massive problem. But I'm not fully understanding the video in the first place. So if you might need to fill me in a little bit on if I've missed something on the harvest part, which tells a bigger story.
Yeah, no, sure. And I think that the idea is that new crops can be grown from seed, and those crops can be specifically sustainable through salt water irrigation. And by that process, you generate crops which can obviously then be converted into woven garments and so on. But there's quite a process of deliverable, developable technology there. So Seb, do you have a view on that in terms of, well, okay, this is a great concept. It really does address, a significant problem. But, how long is this road, you feel? By the way, the team have very successfully secured £10,000 towards the development. So someone somewhere really wants to back this and get it going. But just as a sort of friendly voice, what do you feel? Is it deliverable, doable? What's your view?
I think I really applaud the ambition of it. And I think if it can be achieved, the results would be incredible. So that's a really good starting point. It is potentially something that can help a lot of people in terms of freeing up fresh water supply if that can be achieved. So I think that's the motivation, and I get that. What was less clear in the video, or what I've read, is how they're going to develop saltwater tolerant plants that can have the kind of yield that you need in terms of crops and so on. That was kind of glossed over slightly in the presentation, but obviously in principle, if there are already, or you can engineer or create tolerance in certain crops that will allow them to flourish in saltwater environments, then that's where the project is. They haven't solved that yet, and that's really where it all hangs, for me at least. If they can achieve it, brilliant. Maybe they have already got some, but that wasn't coming across to me. But I would, perhaps that 10 grand is what they need to work together with biologists or whoever it is that can help them to really get that to happen. So it's kind of plant engineering in a sense, or finding the right plants. If they exist. But I think brilliant. If they can do it, it's a superb project.
I think they have validated it. I think there's some really good science behind it. I think it's, in my opinion, probably now a question of pace, really. So, Francis, in your view, I mean, would you see this as a small start, think big, or a think big from the start? Could you incubate this in a small scale in the UK, for instance, propagate those plants, really develop that, and give the time and effort that it would take to get there? Or would you just go big immediately? What would be your approach?
I think I would want to do the development locally initially. We've got a vast amount of coastline and lots of access to lots of seawater. And if you're going to do the bioengineering on developing that seed bed, You could do that research here. If you combine that with some nations that don't have natural resources themselves other than oil and things that we want to stop using and withdrawing from the land, then you can combine better climates with access to coastline and salination and create barren land into fertile land. If you can combine the lack of fertility in areas that don't have water, good water supply, and look at the fertility of the soil as well as how well you can sustain the seeds, then with the salination plants, or not having to use desalination plants, then I think you could be onto something interesting, which is where, rather than locally, you go global and go to a national investment. So you get government support from different regions in the world who might need to approach this as a business for their nation.
Yeah, I love that. That's interesting. And then so to you, Ella, there are certain brands that really want to put themselves forward in fashion as leading the charge, being head of the arrow in terms of sustainability and all that, and others that, famously are less so. Do you think that if you were to try and pick a commercial partner to sponsor this, to really back it, promote it, would you go kind of down market, hit Primark, or would you go kind of up market and jump on a plane and see Gucci? How would you see that route?
Well, interestingly, I saw it as an interior side of things, and thinking about companies in the UK like Chimera, who would potentially jump on it. But Francis makes an interesting point about whether it would actually work in this climate. So, and your question about local or global, I would start local, but it might have to be in a country where the heat is on. And clearly they must be adapting the plants to be resilient to the salt water, unless the salt water is being, the salt's being removed a bit like a greenhouse water effect before it hits the plants. But from what they're saying, it's not. They're creating resilient plants to salt. And I do think it's a genius idea if they can develop it. So to answer your question about who to approach fashion-wise, would I go big or small? I think tests need to be shown first, and then you go as big as you can with the textile thing, because we really need. It's a massive problem. Textiles is the biggest polluter.
Yeah, no, well, indeed. So start small, think big.
Yeah,
always a good way, I think. Yeah. Well, great. Well, guys, I'm actually going to try and splice in now one more project. I know we've only got 60 minutes and we're running out of time rapidly, and someone's going to chop my head off if we overrun. So my life is in your hands, as it were. So, but nevertheless, we actually do have another project that I'd love to roll, which is called Fallback. And if we can just play that video, maybe you can just get some really quick comments on this, because again, it's such a different topic. And I love the fact that in IDE, the range of projects is so broad. Let's run that video. So that's fallback, guys. Really interesting project. It's making quite a strong political point. I happen to know that it came out of one of the students' experience in Iran, where the internet was shut down. And of course, today we've got news from Hong Kong, which is not encouraging with regard to the way things are likely to progress. But how do you feel about students making and being encouraged to make political statements in their projects of this nature? The product does work, incidentally. It's an app with a device. It's been tested. And one of the challenges here could be to scale it through some sort of social enterprise. So there are questions about that with regard to how do you finance social enterprise going forward. So let's pick on Francis first of all. What do you think, Francis? How would you get that going? How would you finance a social enterprise thing?
This is a tricky one for me generally, because I think for me, looking at the materials that I had available, it was so much of an ethereal concept. It was, like you said, they've tested the concept and it's there and it works, but I found it difficult to understand how it could work in reality, how I would personally get my information if the internet broke down. So it's difficult for me to judge. I think something like this, in terms of the development of new technology, it's a funny one. I think making a political statement is important, because if you don't, then you never question things. And if you're not, you've got to have some people who aren't scared of doing that, otherwise we'd never move forward. So I think it's important to do it. I personally didn't quite understand exactly what product I was looking at when I saw it.
What about you, Ella? How do you feel about politics in the student body and all the rest of it? Is that a healthy thing to promote, or is that going to get people into a little bit of trouble?
I think it's important. Trouble or no trouble, it's important. I'm a bit with Francis on not fully understanding that, what the product would be. But in terms of your question of how would you scale that up? I mean, if I'm correct in understanding, although WhatsApp uses the internet, this whole idea, it's an idea of encryption, isn't it? Of putting it somewhere and then it traveling and getting to you so you can open it up. So that's the bit that was missing for me on how does that work when we're not using the postal service. So I was in the dark to that. But I think regardless of trouble or no trouble, I think political views are needed.
Yeah.
And good for them.
I think the technology, there are some future truths, let's say, in the way the technology is being presented, and there's some development work to do there. But I don't think it's necessarily too difficult to put that together. What do you think, Seb? What's your view on how deliverable that is?
Well, I think firstly, I applaud the ambition and the sense of wanting to use design to communicate a political issue and so on. I definitely think that's a good thing. But once beyond that, as you say, you've got these immediate questions about feasibility, and I'm not, in my own head, I said, it feels like it's a sort of big buffer that's just kind of buffering a lot of information as you're surfing the internet, and if the internet goes down, you've still got that information somehow. But I don't know if obviously no idea how it works, and maybe that's something they want to protect if they've identified something that's their IP and what have you. So in a sense, maybe it doesn't matter how it works. Sometimes projects are about communication more than about deliverable, and as you said, with enough weight behind it. And if there's a principle that they've found that could work, then it's just time and money required to actually get it in the shops. And it's a kind of cute little black box, which they've done, black with a little green bit on it. And looks sort of convincing that this would allow you to continue working or communicating even when it's down. But I think really good overall that they're approaching it at all, that subject area.
Yeah, it's a little black. It's like a classic little black book, but new version of, perhaps, Yeah,
and I think actually just on a quick general point, as we're getting towards the end, but I think overall the projects that we've talked about today and the other ones that we've looked at behind the scenes, a lot of really strong ambition in the overall concepts, of a lot of the projects, which I can really applaud. So that's really good to see.
Well, finally to you, Sophia, on this one. So, I mean, you've had a lot of success raising venture capital for your venture and so on. How difficult do you think it is to get finance behind a project like this, which has got a social, political purpose that has got lots of potential, but would require lots of cash to make it work? What do you feel about that?
So I think the subject of censorship is really, really relevant today. And this isn't just in geographies which you've already mentioned and cited. I think it's also prevalent in freedom of speech. We've got conversations happening on social media platforms on whether we should be allowing certain types of freedom of speech, where it's insightful. So the whole concept of censorship is really important. I think from a communications perspective, and that is one of the key things of this particular project, it needs to communicate directly exactly what the product is instantly. So I think in the first question I would ask myself is, does this particular format, the way that they have communicated it, does this really sell what it is that they're trying to get at? And maybe there could be some improvements along the way. And then once you've sort of understood the censorship side, building a product around that would be the next step in terms of who would be interested in this kind of product or service, and is it a service? Without going into the deep mechanics of how does it work, but who specifically would be the person that you'd be selling this to? As a mechanic, is it personal? Is it something that I opt into? Is it direct to consumer? Or are you actually providing it to other technologies and other platforms? And once that's been established, I don't personally think that there should be a real problem. I mean, we've all had issues around censorship. If any of us have indeed spent some time in parts of China trying to make things, which I think there might be a high probability of. There is a difficulty in terms of using certain platforms, being able to access certain kinds of information, normal communication methods that we enjoy in the rest of the world. And so there is definitely a need for a product like this. And it's just centering and making sure that it's clear what the value prop is, it's clear who it's for, and it's clear that it can be scaled in the means of the technology that you're using. Now, once you've got those three, then communicating it really clearly and succinctly to the right investors can easily be done. But I think those are really, really important questions to get right. In the next 3 months, I would sort of just buckle down and kind of really iron those points out first.
Well, great comment. So cool. Listen, we have to close it out now. So there's a few questions that swirl around at student time and so on. What's the best design? What's the most investable project? All this, that, and the other. But there's one question that I'm going to pose to you guys. And if you can give me a snappy answer in order that I get out of here alive, that would be helpful. So I'm going to ask you what you think is the most relevant project in terms of future world and so on. So if you just have a moment to think about that, but in Seb's case, not too many moments, because I'm going to ask you that first. So
oh, right, okay.
Give me a sense. What do you feel is the most relevant project from a direction point of view?
If you count relevant as being the project that could potentially affect most people positively, if that's your criteria, then I would say that the crops, the water, the salty growing crops in salt water is actually, because water in the end is fundamental to our planet, and I think that is probably the most important. But that's on that strict basis of like potential for impacting the most people positively.
Great. Okay, Ella, give me yours.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I was on Tire Collective first, and before watching the video, but I do think the textile would be the biggest relevance.
Cool. Yeah, relevance and impact. Okay, nice one. Francis, lay it down. What do you think?
For me, I've gone for the Tire Collective. I actually think that pollution of the way that the pollution affects land and sea, and the fact we could address that is more important. I think it could be expanded out to a more to a greater level of cleaning up of our vehicles.
Okay, cool. And Sophia then. So Tell me what you think. What's the most relevant, most impactful of those projects we've reviewed today?
I think it'll be between Saltico with the textiles and the censorship, funnily enough, because it's such a big topic. And communication and the right to access certain pieces of communication is a fundamental right. And then, of course, textiles in terms of how it's impacting us is incredibly worrying. So I think those two are my favorite, if I'm allowed to pick two.
Well, you know, I'll allow you to do that. That's a split vote. So we're going to have to bring Peter in at this point, who is allowed equally a vote in terms of relevance. You can accept or decline that challenge, Peter. But if you decline it, you're going to have to throw the ball back to me, which will put me in an awkward position. But anyway, over to you if you feel able to give us a relevance vote, and then close it out as well.
So in terms of relevance, I'm going to have to go for the last one. We know knowledge is contended. So if you want to give us a project that is going to make all of our hackles rise and really provoke debate, then censor us or provide something that could potentially disrupt censorship. So provocative, insightful, exciting. But I love the IDE projects, and so many of them are investable. So many of them we will see again as they become reality.
Yeah. Well, interesting comment, and I personally really like the provocation of the fallback project. I think it's got real courage behind it, and it's formed out of quite adverse circumstances. And so, yeah, my vote would be shaded in that direction for those particular reasons, and particularly as of this very day. But anyway, well, look, I think we've almost just timed that perfectly, which was much more by accident and design. So, I want to say a really big thanks to everybody, because, you've taken time to absorb the projects, think about them, connect through this new medium and so on. And, you've all been superstars. So I really appreciate that. And I've got to do a virtual wave. And I do believe that you need to give me a wave backwards. And it's over to Peter to close it out. And thank everybody.
Thanks.
So thank you, Nick, ever so much for hosting us today. Thank you to each and every one of you who's tuned in and engaged in this webinar, in this seminar, in this critique. And the Dyson School of Design Engineering is highly active with its show running all this week. So check out more on DE Summershow.London, and there are more events coming up. Look forward to seeing you soon.